I'm Tom, 57 years old, and I've been married to Linda, who's 45, for over 15 years. For most of that time, I thought we had a strong, steady marriage. Sure, like any couple, we had our arguments, but nothing that ever made me question her loyalty. That was until a few months ago when things started to change. It began subtly. Linda started going out more often, always for her best friend's birthday. At first, it didn't raise any alarms. I mean, everyone celebrates birthdays, right? But then these birthdays started happening far too frequently. I'd ask, didn't Sarah just have her birthday a few months ago? And Linda would smile and say, oh, we're just celebrating again. Girls like an excuse to party. Her stories seemed harmless at first, but the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous they sounded. No one celebrates birthdays this often. She used to leave it lying around or forget it in the living room. But now, that phone is glued to her hand. She's always checking it, constantly texting, and when I'd ask her who she's messaging, I'd get the same half-hearted response, oh, just work stuff, or, the girls in the group chat. It wasn't like her to be so secretive. And when I asked her why she was always texting, she'd laugh and brush me off, like I was being paranoid. One night, she came home from another one of these so-called birthday parties, smelling like someone else's cologne. When I kissed her on the cheek, the scent hit me, it wasn't hers. I tried to keep calm and asked casually, what's that smell? She just laughed it off, saying, oh, it must have been some guy at the bar. You know how crowded those places get. Her answer was too quick, too easy, and I could tell it wasn't the truth. But I didn't push. I didn't want to start a fight, not without proof. Then there was the night she claimed she had to stay late at work. It seemed like a reasonable excuse at first, but something felt off, so I called her office. Her tone was calm, almost rehearsed, and for a second, I questioned whether I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The lies started piling up. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, she'd accuse me of being too controlling or paranoid. You don't trust me anymore, she'd say, making me feel like the bad guy for even asking questions. She had an explanation for everything, but none of it felt genuine. Then, one evening, she told me she was heading out again. Another birthday party, she said with that same casual tone. But by then, I had stopped believing her stories. Something was wrong, I just didn't know how bad it really was. That night, sitting alone in the empty house, I could feel the truth hanging in the air. I just wasn't ready to face it. That night, after Linda left for another so-called birthday party, I sat alone in our quiet house. I tried to focus on a book, a TV show, anything to get my mind off her. But no matter what I did, my thoughts kept going back to her, and that damn phone she never let out of her sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I finally gave in to my suspicions. I grabbed my jacket and keys, and without really thinking it through, I got in my car and drove. I had no idea where she was, but I figured I'd swing by a few places where she said she might be. There was a restaurant she mentioned earlier, so I drove past. No sign of her car. I went by a couple of bars she'd mentioned before. Again, nothing. I headed home, feeling foolish. Maybe I was overthinking it, maybe she really was out with her friends. But deep down, I knew better. When I got back to the house, I noticed her purse on the counter and decided to check her phone. She always had it with her, but in her rush out the door, she must have left it behind. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. There it was, the lock screen lit up with notifications, messages, missed calls. All from someone named Jake. I knew I shouldn't, but I unlocked her phone. The messages hit me like a punch in the gut. They weren't just friendly texts. They were explicit, intimate. They spoke of meetings, of nights spent together. It wasn't just flirtation, it was full-blown cheating. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again, one message read. Another said, when he's not around, maybe we can finally do what we talked about. I scrolled through more, each one making my blood boil. There were even pictures, ones that left no doubt about what was going on. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the screen. My worst suspicions were confirmed. She was cheating on me, and not just with anyone, with someone she had a full-on affair with. I didn't know what to do. Confront her? Wait until she came home? My mind raced, trying to process the betrayal. Everything we had, the years we spent building a life together, and she was throwing it all away for this. By the time Linda finally came home, it was well past midnight. I was sitting in the dark, phone still in my hand, waiting. When she walked in, she didn't even notice me at first. She dropped her keys on the counter, humming to herself like nothing had happened. That's when I spoke. Had a good time at the birthday party? I asked, my voice steady, though inside, I was seething. She jumped, startled, and then turned to face me, a little too quickly. Oh, hey. Yeah, it was fun. Late night, though. You should have seen the girls. I stood up, phone still in my hand. Is that so? Must have been quite the party for Jake to be messaging you all night. Her face went pale. I could see her mind racing, trying to come up with something, anything. But she couldn't hide it anymore. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do. I tossed her phone on the counter, screen still open to the messages. I read everything. The texts, the pictures. All of it. For a second, she just stood there, speechless, like a deer caught in headlights. Then, instead of admitting it, she did the unthinkable, she started lying again. Tom, it's not what you think, she said, her voice shaky. It's just a joke, something between friends. It didn't mean anything. A joke? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You think this is funny? The late nights, the lies, the pictures? You still going to stand there and try to convince me this is nothing? She tried to keep the act up, but it was falling apart. I could see it in her eyes, she knew she was caught. She could lie all she wanted, but the truth was right in front of us, and there was no escaping it. I thought when I confronted her with the truth, she'd at least have the decency to admit it. But no. Instead, she doubled down on her lies, standing there with that look of false innocence plastered on her face. It made my stomach turn. Tom, you're overreacting, she said, her voice calm, almost cold. You're acting like I've done something horrible. It's just messages. Nothing happened. You being paranoid. Paranoid? I had the proof in my hands, and she had the nerve to gaslight me like this? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, boiling over. But still, I tried to keep my cool. Messages don't just happen, I snapped. And these pictures? That's not nothing, Linda. She looked me dead in the eye, her expression shifting from panic to something more dangerous, a smirk. You really going to throw everything away over a few texts and some stupid pictures? Grow up, Tom. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe the audacity, the cruelty. It wasn't just the affair, it was the way she was treating me, as if I was the one being unreasonable, as if I was the problem. I had spent years loving this woman, trusting her, only to be met with this kind of cold-hearted betrayal. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it was no use. The rage was too strong. How long? I demanded. How long have you been seeing him? How long have you been lying to my face? She shrugged, completely unfazed. Does it even matter? What difference does it make now? That was it. That was the moment I realized that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I thought I knew. She was a stranger, cold, calculating, and heartless. I had suspected the affair for a while, but to see her treat me with such contempt, like our entire life together meant nothing, it broke something inside me. "You don't even care, do you?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and pain. "All these years, and you don't even care what this is doing to me?" She just stared at me, her eyes devoid of any emotion. "Tom, people change. We've both changed. You need to stop being so dramatic." Dramatic? That's what she called this? She was cheating on me, lying to me for God knows how long, and now she wanted to act like it was no big deal, like it was something I should just accept and move on from? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like she didn't even see me as her husband anymore, just an obstacle in the way of her new life. Then she said it. The words that would haunt me long after this night was over. "Maybe if you weren't so boring, Tom, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." That was the final nail in the coffin. I stood there, feeling the weight of her words crash over me. All the memories, the years of marriage, all the times I had tried to be a good husband, a supportive partner, it was all for nothing. She had already decided I wasn't enough for her, long before I ever found out about the affair. And now she was using it as an excuse to justify her betrayal. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the rage, but it was overwhelming. She had thrown everything we had away, and for what? For someone like him? Someone she didn't even respect enough to be honest about. "You're a piece of work, Linda," I said through gritted teeth. "You think you can just do whatever you want and walk away from this like it's nothing? You think I'm going to let you get away with this?" She crossed her arms, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What are you going to do, Tom? Throw a tantrum? You're not exactly in a position to do much else." I stood there, shaking, feeling the betrayal course through me like poison. She didn't even care. She didn't regret a single thing. And that's when I realized that this wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about taking back control, about making her feel just a fraction of the pain she had caused me. "I'm not going to throw a tantrum, Linda," I said, my voice low, controlled. "But I promise you this, you're going to regret ever thinking I was someone you could walk all over." That night, I couldn't close my eyes. Everything replayed in my mind like some cruel joke, the lies, the sneaking around, the way Linda had dismissed me, like I was nothing. After 15 years together, she had thrown it all away and didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it. She looked at me like I was the problem, like I was just in the way of her new life. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, I wasn't going to sit around and let her do this to me. I wasn't going to be her fool any longer. The next morning, Linda acted like nothing had happened, as if last night's confrontation hadn't even scratched the surface. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, scrolling through her phone, her face a blank slate. No remorse. No apology. It was like looking at a stranger, not the woman I'd spent nearly 2 decades building a life with. I watched her from the doorway, gripping my coffee mug a little too tight. The rage inside me was bubbling up, but I knew better than to let it out right there and then. She thought she still had me under control. Let her think that, I told myself. Let her keep playing her games, but I was done being the clueless husband. Later that day, I told her I needed some air. I grabbed my jacket and keys, and instead of driving aimlessly around town like I had the night before, I headed for a place I hadn't been to in years. There was a quiet meadow by the river, not far from where I grew up. I used to go there all the time as a kid, back when life was simpler, back when I didn't have to think about betrayal or broken promises. It was the only place that made sense to me right now. When I got there, I stepped out of the car and stood by the water for a moment, taking in the stillness. The air was crisp, the breeze gentle as it swept through the trees. It was exactly what I needed, a moment to think, a moment to remember who I was before all of this. Before Linda, before the lies. I walked along the riverbank, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved for so long turned into this cold, distant person? The same woman I'd spent years building a life with was now sneaking behind my back, meeting another man. And when I confronted her, she didn't even flinch. No shame. No guilt. Just lies. I wondered how long she had been faking it, pretending everything was fine while she slipped out to meet him. But the truth was, I had ignored the signs for far too long. I saw them. I felt them. The distance between us had been growing for months, maybe years. I'd made excuses, hoping that things would get better. But she had already checked out of our marriage. And I? I had been blind to it all, trying to hold on to something that was already gone. I sat down on a smooth rock by the water, staring at the river as it flowed by, calm and steady. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, the good and the bad. It wasn't all lies, I knew that. We had real moments, real love, but somewhere along the way, she'd changed. Or maybe it was me who had changed. Maybe I hadn't seen it happening, but we'd drifted apart, and now it was too late to fix it. As I sat there, I felt the anger slowly give way to something else. Sadness. Loss. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing the life we'd built together, the future I thought we had. She was moving on, and I was left standing there, wondering what the hell had happened to us. But then, something else stirred inside me. A quiet determination. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to let her define the rest of my life. She'd made her choice. Now, I had to make mine. I got up, took one last look at the river, and knew what I had to do. It was time to stop looking back, time to stop hoping for something that was never coming back. Linda was gone, at least the woman I thought she was. The rest of this? It was just cleanup. I drove back home with a sense of clarity. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I knew one thing for sure, I was done being her fool. I wasn't going to let her lies ruin me. It was time to take control of my life again. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. By the time I got back home, I knew what I needed to do. There was no going back. The days of second-guessing myself, of hoping things might magically return to how they used to be, were over. I wasn't that naive anymore. Linda had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. When I walked into the house, I found her lounging on the couch, casually flipping through the channels on the TV, like nothing had changed. Her phone was in her lap, of course, lighting up with notifications. Probably Jake. Maybe it was the fact that I'd seen her with that damn phone so many times, texting him while I sat across the room, oblivious. Or maybe it was how calm she looked, like she hadn't just ripped our life apart. I wasn't going to explode at her. That would be too easy for her to dismiss. No, this time, I was going to be smart. Cold, even. I was done being the emotional wreck she expected me to be. "Hey," she said, glancing up as I walked in, barely acknowledging my presence. "Did you have a good drive?" I stood there for a moment, taking in the scene. Her, pretending everything was normal, like she wasn't texting some guy she was sleeping with. Like she hadn't lied to me, over and over. But instead of confronting her head-on, I gave her a cold smile. "Yeah, actually." "I did," I replied, my voice steady. "Got some things figured out." She nodded, barely paying attention, and went back to her phone. I watched her for a moment, that strange calm still settled over me. I had the proof. I had everything I needed to take her down in the divorce. And that was my next move. I went upstairs to the office and locked the door behind me. I knew that trying to reason with her wasn't worth it anymore, but that didn't mean I was going to let her walk away with her lies untouched. I opened my computer and started going through all the evidence I had gathered, the texts, the photos, every little detail that showed how deep her betrayal had gone. I knew it wasn't going to be enough just to end the marriage. I wanted to make sure she didn't walk away from this like nothing happened, like she hadn't betrayed the man who stood by her for 15 years. So I started making calls. My first call was to my lawyer. I laid it all out for him, every bit of it. He wasn't surprised, but he was ready. "Tom, you've got enough here to make sure she walks away with nothing." "You sure about this?" he asked. "I'm sure," I replied, my voice firm. "I want this done. I don't care how long it takes or how ugly it gets." The next call was to the private investigator I'd hired a few weeks back when I first started noticing Linda's strange behavior. It wasn't enough to just have the messages between her and Jake. I needed more. I wanted to know how often she'd been with him, where they'd gone, how long this had really been going on. He told me he had the reports ready, photos, dates, the whole thing. She was in for a rude awakening. I spent the next few hours gathering everything, organizing it, making sure there were no loose ends. It was strange, really. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt resolved. I wasn't going to let this break me. I was going to come out of this stronger, and she was going to regret thinking she could play me for a fool. When I came back downstairs, she was still on the couch, still glued to her phone. This time, though, I saw her glance at me, like she was testing the waters. Maybe she sensed something had shifted, maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. She wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. "Hey, Linda," I said, my voice calm, almost casual. "Yeah?" She didn't even look up. "I think we need to talk," I said, sitting down across from her. Finally, she put the phone down, and for the first time in what felt like months, she really looked at me. "About what?" "About us," I said, meeting her gaze. "I know you've been lying to me. I know about Jake." Her face froze, just for a split second, before she caught herself. "Tom, you're imagining things again. We've been over this." "No, we haven't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "But we're about to. I have proof, Linda. You can lie all you want, but it's over. I know everything." Her eyes widened, and I saw the panic set in. She tried to cover it up with that same dismissive tone she'd been using for months. "Tom, you're overreacting. I don't know what you think you know, but—" "Stop," I said firmly. "You're done lying. I've already talked to my lawyer. This marriage is over." She stared at me, finally realizing that I wasn't bluffing. "Tom, wait. Let's not do anything hasty. We can talk about this." I shook my head. "You had your chance to talk. Now, you can talk to my lawyer." I stood up, watching her try to process what had just happened. The fear in her eyes was real now. She knew I wasn't the same man who had stood by her, forgiving and hoping things would change. I had changed, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, feeling more in control than I had in years. Linda had underestimated me, but that was her mistake. And now, she was going to face the consequences. I didn't sleep much that night, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The anger that had consumed me for weeks had cooled into something sharper, something more dangerous. I wasn't going to be Linda's fool any longer. This time, she was going to pay for every lie, every betrayal. The next few days were a blur of meetings with lawyers and my investigator. I didn't waste any time. I wasn't going to give her a chance to talk me out of it, to pull me back into her web of manipulation. No, this was already in motion, and nothing was going to stop it now. I filed for divorce that week. She didn't see it coming. When the papers were delivered, I could see the shock in her face, the panic. She thought she had more time. Thought she could keep stringing me along, maybe even find a way to salvage the situation. but it was too late for that. "Tom, we need to talk about this," she said one evening, as she cornered me in the living room, holding the divorce papers in her hand. "You don't have to do this. We can work through it." I didn't flinch. "Work through what?" "The fact that you've been lying to me for months? Cheating behind my back while I was trying to hold us together?" Her face tightened, but she pressed on. "It was a mistake. I made a mistake. But we can fix this." I stood there, staring at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel that tug in my chest. The one that used to make me question myself, make me wonder if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. That part of me was gone. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice cold. "You made a mistake. And now you're going to live with it." Her eyes darted around the room, like she was looking for some way out, some way to make me stop. But she wasn't in control anymore. She couldn't manipulate me. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said, her voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed, a bitter sound that felt foreign coming from me. "You didn't want to hurt me? You've been lying to me, sleeping with another man, treating me like an idiot for months. What did you think was going to happen, Linda?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. There was nothing left to say. That night, she stayed in the guest room. We didn't speak again. In the mornings, we'd pass each other in the hallway, exchanging nothing more than brief glances. She knew it was over, but she hadn't accepted it yet. Part of her still believed she could turn things around, that I'd soften, that I'd let her off the hook. But she was wrong. The next few weeks were tense, quiet. I had already moved my finances, secured everything I needed to protect myself. She wouldn't be getting a dime more than she deserved, and even that was pushing it. I'd made sure of it. My lawyer had set the wheels in motion. The divorce would be quick and clean. Linda wouldn't get the chance to drag it out or make it messy. And Jake? He was nothing. Just a blip in the background now, a footnote in this chapter of my life. I didn't need revenge on him. That wasn't my focus. My focus was making sure Linda couldn't hurt me anymore. A few days after she got the papers, Linda came to me again. But this time, it was different. She wasn't angry, wasn't defensive. She looked defeated. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor, the fear behind her eyes. "Tom," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. For everything." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, wondering what she expected me to say. Sorry didn't fix this. Sorry didn't take away the months of deceit, the betrayal. Sorry didn't make up for what she'd done. "Sorry doesn't change anything," I finally said, my voice steady. "It's over, Linda. We're done." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I couldn't. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The day she moved out, I stood by the window, watching as she loaded her car with the last of her things. She didn't look back. I didn't either. There was no reason to. Our life together was over, and there was no going back. When she drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It wasn't victory either. It was just peace. The storm was finally over, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. I wasn't naive. I knew there'd be rough days ahead. The pain wouldn't disappear overnight. But I also knew that I'd come out of this stronger. She had underestimated me, but I wasn't broken. I was still standing. And now, I had my life back.